Dracula Origin. Yet another PC game that I wasn't quite able to get up and running myself, with not really any clear, concrete solution as to a fix. Just a lot of back and forth chatter on the internet about how you're supposed to monkey around with your graphics card and or your graphics card drivers in a way that I wasn't necessarily comfortable in doing. So I just decided it best to leave it alone. But to touch very briefly on the gameplay here, it's virtually identical to what you will find in the Sherlock Holmes series. Same developer and everything like that. But I really adore what Frogwares does and how it treats its point and click adventures like this. So I hesitate to say that this was boring in a sense, but I really feel like that might be a larger symptom of just not being able to experience it myself firsthand. You know, having to sit back and watch somebody else solve all the puzzles and progress through the game just felt very removing or disconnecting to me. But I'm not going to punish it too hard for that. In terms of story and characters and everything else, that's where it gets a little bit tricky for me because I feel like in terms of feeding into the lore, or I guess you could call it the overall Dracula mythos. This game is great. It wastes very little time in expressing to you as the player that this isn't going to be your typical or traditional telling of the Dracula story. It has you play as Dr. Van Helsing, who receives a letter from Jonathan Harker stating that he has located and pursued Dracula to his castle with the intention of destroying him, although he doesn't necessarily feel confident in his ability to return home alive. So, in the event that something were to happen to him, just please look out for his wife Mina and make sure that she's okay and has everything that she needs. And it really kind of puts forth the idea that Van Helsing, Jonathan Harker, and Dr. Seward at least have some prior knowledge of vampires at the very least, if not having clashed with Dracula himself at some point before this. And I just couldn't shake the feeling that like if a vampire or a werewolf or really any other type of creature of the night were to crop up, these would be the guys that you'd want to call. Now the game doesn't explicitly say this or really point at that in any real fashion, but it's just the vibe that I got, and I really enjoyed these characters being utilized uh, together like that. It was just a lot of fun, I thought. Um, but in terms of Dracula himself, this is probably the most unhinged or metal variation of this character that I've come across thus far. His story explores a lot of dark themes, including Satanism, which isn't entirely uncommon for a story like this, considering when you're again talking about creatures of the night, they tend to have close ties to Satan, often being referred to as his spawn or his offspring, and things like that. So again, not entirely uncommon. Um, in terms of his origin story, what we have here is Dracula was a crusader against the pagans who committed all sorts of atrocities against hundreds, if not thousands, of men, women, and children. Just awful things. And when everything was said and done and the wars were over, he had invited um, a number of his comrades and their families to come and live with him in his castle, where he eventually becomes smitten with the daughter of one of them. But because of his less than stellar reputation and personality and everything like that, she did not reciprocate his feelings, um, turning him down in favor of somebody a little bit more charming, a little bit more her speed. And he took this rejection so hard that he renounced his faith, renounced God entirely in favor of being a full-on Satanist. Now, fast forward a little bit to the point in time in which the happy couple announces their engagement. He has this bright idea to say, hey, come to my castle, I'll throw you a party. And this, as the scene plays out, the young lady leaves the room or the great hall or whatever they're in to go put on a dress or something. And Dracula utilizes this time to pick a fight. He calls everyone that's there out for their holier than thou attitude. You know, how can you possibly sit there and say you're better than me in any way, shape, or form when you did the exact same stuff that I did during the war? Basically, how dare you? It evolves into an altercation with the groom-to-be that ultimately ends with Dracula ripping his throat out and drinking him dry before turning his eyes to the rest of the room and massacring everybody in there completely. Now, right about that time is when the young lady comes back into the room, and naturally she freaks out a little bit and decides to run to the roof of the castle, where she is followed by Dracula, who protests, saying, you know, I'm in love with you. Everything I did there was for you, blah, blah, blah. And she decides to take a swan dive off of the roof. So Dracula's intention throughout the course of the game is to use this ancient Egyptian resurrection ritual to bring back her soul, essentially. And it just so happens that Mina Harker would make a perfect vessel for that. The problem here is that the game just doesn't do very much with it. As much work as they did with you know, building him up as this pretty excellent villain, in my opinion, it just doesn't do very much or go really anywhere. I mean, you find out all of this background story secondhand through collecting documentation and things like that, and you see Dracula probably all of maybe excuse me, maybe 3 or 4 times throughout the course of the game. The first time is you corner him in Mina's bedroom, to which he just kind of immediately backs off, turns into a bat, and flees out the window. The second time is when you reach the end of the game and are stopping him from the initial ritual, and you stick him with a crossbow bolt. Um, and the last is in a post credit scene where he appears in front of another character who helps us along in our journey. All very, very important things that I want you to keep in mind for when we discuss the sequel in the next video. But I don't know. I just have this feeling like it might have been better if we were allowed to play as Dracula through at least a portion of the game and experience his origin story through his eyes. Um, but I don't know. Other than that, I mean, it's fine. It seems playable if you can get it running. It seems enjoyable, and it's certainly not as bad as what we have to look forward to next. So that's going to wrap this video up, guys. But as always, thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves, and we will see you in that next video.